A few years ago, a minister pondered how to keep people from skipping out on a particular Sunday and its associated sermon. So he announced in the church newsletter that next week's sermon would be entitled, "Everything You Need to Know About Sex." The following week comes, and there was not an empty pew in the sanctuary. As the minister gazed across the space, he recognized several people from Christmas Eve or Easter Sunday services. Otherwise, they never attend church. And the order of service that day went through quickly, and as the congregation waited anxiously for the latest word on the world's most obsessive topic, and a quiet hush descended on the room. Even the usual sermon sleepers were awake, anxious to listen to what was about to be said. The minister rose and stood in the pulpit and said, "Sex was created by God as an expression of love between husbands and wives and a way of propagating life on planet Earth. Now that we've settled that, let's talk about stewardship." Admit it, some of you would prefer a sermon on sex rather than listening yet again to stewardship. And stewardship has its unfortunate association with budget, pledge cards, and paying bills, salaries, and benefits, keeping the lights on, keeping the minister paid. But that's not what Paul is sharing with the Corinthians today. Oh, sure, he is asking for support through contributions. He's collecting among the churches. But in its convoluted way, this stewardship sermon is more of an invitation rather than a solicitation. Because after all, it is so easy for us to put up a visible or a mental sign of no solicitation. But it is often difficult to refuse anybody's invitation. We find excuses all the time to say no to giving. We find it hard to say no to participating, to invitation, to joining something. And the Corinthians have been caught in saying, yes, we will, but have not actually done it yet, have not joined in the participation as Macedonia churches have already done. In the section of Scripture just before our reading today, Paul shares how the Macedonian churches begged to give, despite their own adversities, to assist those struggling in Jerusalem, providing graciously, even sacrificially, to others who are experiencing need. The Macedonian church's generosity reflected God's transformation within their lives, to look past their current adversities and move from a should kind of mindset to a want to response to Paul's invitation for Jerusalem's needs. How often in life do we encounter the shoulds in life, but we never get to the want to in our response? You see, it's really easy for us to claim all kinds of things. We can always like something without ever going to that particular place. We can, or even purchasing something from a store or providing any real effort of support whatsoever. I can be a fan of almost anything thanks to the internet, and often our lives are consumed with its aspirations rather than its realities. And certainly with the emergence and use of social media, we can even have all appearances of interesting, wholesome, and active lives without really living up to any of it. I'm sure most of you are not aware that Prairie Avenue's own Facebook page has 184 likes and 211 follows. We have never seen 184 people in this sanctuary in over 50 years. And if they suddenly showed up today or next week, there's not enough room for them to all be here. But it is in life so easy to talk about faith without being faithful. It's so easy for us to preach love without loving. It's so easy to teach forgiveness without forgiving, to testify about missions without helping or healing, to verbally champion that we need a youth program and youth ministries without contributing or programming anything, to talk about evangelism without ever inviting. It's not too uncommon among us mainliners that we invite a person to join us at church once every 20 years. Being caught between should and want will not make a bit of difference for others until we decide to make a difference for others. Like the Corinthians, we find ourselves in life caught saying things that we haven't finished, we haven't even started, we haven't completed, commitments that we have yet to fulfill. It is a journey, an effort. It requires commitment to move from the shoulds of life to the wants of life. A journey that Jesus already made in action as proof of God's abounding grace already in the world, transforming it through the hearts and actions of the Macedonian churches, and now extending the invitation to enter it by the considerable financial resourcing apparently available in Corinth, as Paul reminds them that they have been richly blessed already. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, in human form, gave up virtually all he had to bring us into fellowship with God. Not because he should, but because he wanted to. And in exchange for demonstrating love from the Father, he experienced a life of rejection, humiliation, betrayal, and unjust execution for loving us to the point of our need for salvation. It is true that our giving can never overcome the generosity of grace expressed on a Roman cross. And that certainly seems to be one of the two measurements that Paul is reminding the Corinthian church of. This opportunity of grace, this opportunity of extending grace that has already been given to enhance, to assist those who are found now in need. We are invited to give not because we have the ability, nor should we try to claim a certain self-righteousness, but that what we already receive is too good to keep only for ourselves. We give because God already gave more than enough for our sake. So how do we practice what we often short-sightedly proclaim? Not with words or intentions, but with action. A ready desire matched with the willingness to meet it wholeheartedly. Stewardship requires a kind of faithfulness. And stewardship also requires giving ourselves first. To be motivated enough, to be persuaded not to wait for others, but to respond in kind, to already reach out beyond ourselves. We may be first motivated by the shoulds, but we also have the ability to move us to the want. I know that I've been on a journey in this, between the shoulds to the want tos. When I started in seminary, of course, the call is to support and to give, and I was raised to respond and to be generous, to give when you could, what you could, and, as to whatever you felt called to give. Now, there were some expectations mentioned from time to time. There was always the goal of a tithe, but it was rarely what actually happened. More often than not, what happened would be excuses as to why. Or circumstances hadn't arisen as such, that we should do that, but we have these bills to pay. We should do that, but we are still trying to get out of debt. We should do this, but have you noticed the pattern? We should, but we should, but we should, but. It finally took the realization that it's not about the shoulds, it's about the want to. If we really want to, it's amazing what we can actually pull together. Have you noticed that in life? When we really want something, it is amazing how coordinated we become, how determined we have it, how quickly it can be accomplished, regardless of the limitations we may have in the department of having a salary, being able to pay the bills, all those things. But if we really, really, really want to, then we can make a way for it. Is it that way when sharing our abundance to others? That we really plan, we really make a way with it? Or do we make a way of excuses against it? Because it is how we give that shows our generosity. It's how we respond that shows how we have been blessed. It is through those ways that our true nature is revealed. Because if we always find a way around, then we will always avoid the situation. We will always put up a barrier. We will always block and always stop. So how did I move from should to want to? Well, it wasn't easy. It never is until transformation, to recognize that what I've already been given, I have been entrusted with rather than earned, that I'm not entitled to it, but rather undeserving from it, and that how I live and prioritize reveals who and what my God is, because there will always be in our nature to justify for ourselves, to always find a reason to keep ourselves together while the whole world is falling apart, to always find that at some point we'll do that, but not now. As soon as this is done, or that is done, or we have acquired that, or when we're at the means, when the kids are done, when the mortgage is paid off, when I retire, then you'll never get to it. Unless you get to the point where you beg to give. You can't help yourself. I know so few experience it, but I can speak from it that it is truly liberating, truly amazing what can happen when you decide not to give leftovers to God, but to give first overs to God. The anxieties, the worries, they never disappear, but they are never as large as they once were. And it begins by simply being remarkably consistent. Do what you can do frequently. Give what stretches you. Paul is the first to say, do not put yourself in poverty for the poverty of others, but give according to your abundance that God has already provided for you. Give what is helpful and give it consistently. And you'll be surprised at how your life adapts, how you change your priorities a bit, simply because you know that you will give this first and leave the rest for yourself. It's funny how our lives are in better order when we consider the other first in our lives rather than others last in it. I find myself not asking the question, should I give? But I want to give. It's not a question of figuring out what I can spare, but what is a generous response to the need? Because this passage isn't about supporting churches. This passage is about supporting other followers of Jesus in need. And certainly the church does that. But certainly its membership should always be doing that. As followers of Jesus who gave himself, we should also be giving just as quickly, just without question. Not qualifying them, not examining whether they're worthy or not. We have no record of Jesus doing that to anyone who received his grace. Why would we dare think we have the right to ask it ourselves? So, in our generosity, are we doing it because we should or because we want to? Do we give to others from our tip jar or from a tipped jar, pouring out into the world to the point of need that still calls us, begging us to give? May we all be beggars, stepping in line first to give it away. Amen.